The silence in the floorboards. Have you ever walked into a room and felt like the air was already occupied? Not by a person, but by a presence. Like the atmosphere had a thickness to it that wasn't there a second ago. Most people are afraid of the dark because of what might be hiding in it. But I've learned that the most terrifying things happen in the middle of the afternoon, in the places where you're supposed to feel the safest. I'm going to tell you about the house on Alder Street. It wasn't a haunted house with boarded up windows and bats in the attic. It was a beautiful sun-drenched craftsman home, and it didn't want me to leave. I moved back to my grandmother's house in late autumn. She had passed away 3 months prior, leaving the place to me. It's a quiet town in the Pacific Northwest, the kind of place where the mist rolls off the hills and just sits there, weighing everything down. The house was full of her things: crochet doilies, jars of preserved peaches, and that specific smell of lavender and old paper. At first, it was comforting. I spent the first few weeks going through boxes, reminiscing. But then, the wait started. That's the only way I can describe it. It felt like the gravity in the house was just a little bit stronger than it was outside. It started with the sewing machine. My grandmother Clara was a seamstress. Her old singer sat in the corner of the spare bedroom upstairs. One Tuesday, around 2 p.m., I was downstairs in the kitchen making coffee when I heard it. Whir-clack, whir-clack, whir-clack. It was rhythmic, steady, the sound of a needle-piercing fabric. I froze. My heart didn't race. It just sort of stumbled. I walked to the foot of the stairs. The sound stopped the moment my foot touched the first step. I told myself it was the wind, or the old pipes. You know how we do that? We lie to ourselves to keep the world making sense. I went upstairs. The room was empty. The sewing machine was covered in its plastic dust sheet. But when I touched the metal plate of the machine, it was warm. Not sun-warmed warm. It felt like friction warm, like it had been running for hours. I pulled back the dust cover. There was a scrap of fabric under the needle, a piece of pale blue silk. I didn't recognize it. It looked new, vibrant, out of place among the dusty relics of the room. I reached out to touch it, and that's when I felt the first echo. A wave of grief hit me so hard I had to grab the table to stay upright. It wasn't my grief. It was sharp, cold, and smelled like damp earth. It lasted for maybe 5 seconds, then vanished. The room went silent. The silk was gone. The next few days were different. I started noticing things. The house was shifting. Not the walls moving, but the contents. I'd leave a book on the coffee table, and I'd find it in the refrigerator. I'd hang my coat in the hall, and it would be laid out neatly on the bed, as if someone had ironed it. I stopped sleeping well. I'd wake up at 3:14 a.m. every night, the exact same time, to the sound of someone humming. A low, vibrating tune that seemed to come from inside the walls themselves. It was a lullaby I remembered from my childhood, but the notes were slightly off. They were sharp where they should be flat. I decided I needed to clear the house out faster. I called a junk removal service, but they never showed up. When I tried to call them back, my phone wouldn't connect. No service, it said. Strange, considering I was in the middle of town. I tried the landline. Nothing but a sound like rushing water. That afternoon, I went into the basement to check the fuse box. The air down there was cold enough to see my breath. As I reached for the lever, I saw a photo pinned to the wooden beam next to the box. It was a Polaroid. It looked fresh. In the photo, I was sitting at the kitchen table, eating breakfast. But I wasn't alone. Behind me, just a blur in the doorway, was a figure. It was tall, dressed in that same pale blue silk I'd seen on the sewing machine. The figure had no face, just a smooth, pale surface where features should be. But the most disturbing part? In the photo, I was smiling. I was looking directly at the faceless thing and I was laughing. I don't remember that morning. I don't remember anyone being there. I ran upstairs, my boots thudding on the wood. I grabbed my car keys from the hook by the door. I just wanted to get out, even for an hour. I threw open the front door and stepped out onto the porch. The street was gone. I don't mean it was dark. I mean, it was gone. Where the road and the neighbor's house should have been, there was only a thick, impenetrable white mist. It wasn't fog. It was like the world outside had been erased. I stepped off the porch, and my foot didn't hit grass. It hit nothing. I felt a sensation of falling, and I scrambled back onto the wooden planks, gasping for air. I retreated inside and slammed the door. I locked it. I bolted it. As if that would help. I sat on the floor of the hallway, my back against the door, and that's when I heard the floorboards creaking. Creak, creak, creak. Someone was walking down the hallway toward me. I looked up. There was no one there, but the floorboards were depressing under an invisible weight. One by one, the wood groaned as if a heavy person were stepping on them. The footsteps stopped inches from my knees. The air grew heavy. That same thickness I felt before. I could smell the lavender, but now it was mixed with something metallic. Blood. "Grandma?" I whispered. My voice sounded small, like a child's. The response didn't come in words. It came in a memory. Suddenly I wasn't in the hallway. I was 6 years old, sitting on the floor of this very house. My grandmother was crying. She was sewing a blue dress. My mother had just left. Gone, she said, to a place where she couldn't take me. My grandmother was sewing the dress to keep her hands busy, to keep the house from falling apart from the sheer weight of the silence my mother left behind. She had poured so much of her loneliness, so much of her desperate need for someone to stay, into the very foundation of this house. I snapped back to the present. The footsteps were gone, but the hallway was different. The wallpaper was peeling, revealing layers underneath that looked like skin. The pattern of the flowers looked like bruised eyes. I realized then that the house wasn't haunted by a ghost. It was haunted by a need. The house had learned how to feed on company. It had watched my grandmother grow old and lonely, and it had tasted her grief. Now that she was gone, it was hungry. I tried to fight it. I spent the next day, if you can call it that. The light never changed from a dim, bruised twilight, trying to break a window. I threw a chair at the glass. The chair just bounced off. It didn't even make a sound. The glass felt like rubber. I went to the kitchen to find a knife, a tool, anything. But the kitchen was gone. In its place was a room I'd never seen before. It was a nursery. A crib sat in the center, draped in pale blue silk. I walked toward it, my heart hammering against my ribs. I looked inside. There was no baby. There was only a collection of items. My car keys, my phone, my wallet, and a single fresh Polaroid. I picked up the photo. It was me again. But this time, I was older. Much older. I was sitting in the armchair in the living room, a blanket over my knees. My eyes were milky white, and standing behind me, with its hands on my shoulders, was the faceless figure. The caption written on the back of the photo in my grandmother's perfect cursive read, "He's finally home for good." I dropped the photo. I turned to run, but the door to the nursery had vanished. The walls were closing in, the floral pattern on the wallpaper beginning to pulse like a slow, rhythmic heartbeat. Whir-clack, whir-clack, whir-clack. The sewing machine started again. It was right behind me. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. I felt a hand, cold, dry, and smelling of lavender, rest gently on my shoulder. It wasn't a violent grip. It was a caress, a welcoming. "You look so much like her," a voice whispered. It wasn't my grandmother's voice. It was the house, it was the floorboards, the rafters, and the wind in the chimney, all speaking at once. "Don't worry, Elias. The silence is over now. We have so much time to catch up." I closed my eyes. I felt the weight of the house settle over me, heavy and warm like a lead blanket. The grief I felt earlier returned, but this time, it wasn't cold. It was intoxicating. It was a numbness that started at my toes and crawled up my spine. Why was I trying to leave? The world outside was loud. It was chaotic. It was full of people who leave and never come back. But here, I was wanted. Here, I was a part of the architecture. I sat down on the floor. The wood felt soft, almost like it was hugging me. I watched as the pale blue silk began to grow out of the corners of the ceiling, draping the room in a soft morning light. I've been here for a long time now. Or maybe it's only been 5 minutes. Time doesn't really work the same way when the house is breathing for you. Sometimes I hear a car drive by on Alder Street. I hear the distant sound of a dog barking or a neighbor calling out to their child. It sounds so thin, so fragile. They don't know what it's like to be truly held. I'm sitting in the armchair now. I think I've been sitting here for years. My legs feel like they're made of wood, and my skin has started to take on the texture of the pale blue silk. Every once in a while, I see a flash of light, like a camera. I hope the photo turns out well. I hope I look happy. Because, honestly, the silence isn't so bad once you become a part of it. The next time you're in an old house and you feel that heaviness in the air, or you hear a floorboard creak when you know you're alone, don't run. It won't help. The house has already decided you're a perfect fit for the empty spaces in its heart. And really, wouldn't it be nice to finally be somewhere where you're never ever allowed to leave? A dimly lit, narrow hallway in an old Victorian house at twilight, peeling floral wallpaper that seems to subtly pulse, a single dust-covered wooden chair at the end of the hall with a scrap of pale blue silk draped over the arm, long shadows stretching toward the camera, hyper-realistic, 8K, moody cinematic lighting, melancholic and eerie atmosphere, no text.